And welcome, everybody. I'm Robert Aducci, and I'm here with Timothy Brown.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
And we are here for Ulysses Worlds news. We are going to, we have a special guest today, someone who's got his hands in a lot of stuff we're doing. Special guest, JM Defoggi. JM, welcome.
Woohoo!
Hello, thanks for having
JM.
me on.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So, for those of you that don't know JM is the lead writer for Myth Tales of Legend. He's also the streaming GM for Ulysses. He streams Fading Suns and Torg Eternity, soon to be more stuff.
hmm
He's also the owner of Iconic Productions, line developer for 13th Age, host of Iconic Podcast, a new Bronze Age RPG coming up next February called Jackals.
Yeah.
So, welcome, JM.
Well, thank you.
JM is
Thanks for
the
having me on.
gamer's gamer, man.
Yeah, yeah. So, how long have you been doing streaming, Jam?
You know what? My first encounter with streaming was actually doing a Dark Eye game, probably 4 or 5 years ago. The Hidden Knife that you can still find on YouTube in the archives. But I didn't really do a whole lot of streaming until we kind of talked about starting to look at building a studio out here in Colorado Springs, and then um, we started the Fading Sun stream about a year ago, and then added the Torg game um, 8 months ago.
Yeah,
So that's kind of my limited experience with streaming.
limited. That sounds like a lot of experience with streaming to me.
When you're doing it several times a week, it builds up.
Yeah.
So, speaking of Fading Suns, let's get into the Fading Suns news. So, Eric recently just reopened the late pledge manager for Fading Suns because some of the backers had not kind of updated their pledges like they need
Yeah.
to make sure they have everything. So that's good for you guys out there. If you are seeing this within the next few days, a week or two maybe, it will still be up. And so if you missed it, you can pledge again. Or you can still pledge right now. If you had pledged earlier, if you backed the Kickstarter, make sure that you go to Game On Tabletop, look for the Fading Suns crowdfunding, and you can update all your information there. You can add stuff still, and then in a few days we'll shut it back down to get our final numbers in there, and hopefully everybody does everything they need to so they can get their books.
Awesome. Is there a hard date when that's going to shut down?
I think it said 12 days, I think, from yesterday. So
Okay, so we got a little while. Okay, so
yeah.
definitely get out there. Awesome.
So it should be, looks like the end of the month about.
Okay. I know we're working on the PDFs to get those out. I know that we talked with our layout people who will be cranking on those towards the end of this month to get them out to everybody just as soon as we can for the main 3 books, and everything else will come out, get to the backers a little bit after that. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And speaking of streams and Fading Sun streams, JM, why don't you tell us about the Fading Sun stream that you're doing?
So we are the one we're doing right now because of the quarantine. We're doing a following a group that initially was part of House Hawkwood and got thrown through a jump gate and onto a lost road to a world called Antioch. That was kind of our first arc, and that was the Annals of Antioch. And they've sort of come back to the known worlds, and they're now in this new arc called Curse of the Abandoned, as they're trying to figure out what is really going on. They encountered some antinomists and a powerful creature from the dark between stars on Antioch that seems to have had ties back to the sort of the Imperium. And now they're actually on a hollowed out asteroid called New Phoenicia, and they're sort of reaching the climax of this arc as well, as they are confronting pirates that have been infiltrated by antinomist cultists.
Awesome.
Nice. So what's your experience been with streaming Fading Sun? So like you started doing it while it was a playtest. Tell us
I
about that.
did, yeah. It was a lot of fun. It was interesting because we got the initial playtest docs and we made characters and we started, just sort of playing with our group to get a feel for it before we started recording. And we assembled a bunch of playtest notes. I was getting ready to send them to Bill, and Bill sent me the updated playtest docs. And basically, all of our playtest notes were addressed in the updated playtest docs. So we just sort of incorporated them and moved on. My group comes from a very heavy D20 background and a heavy fantasy background. So moving into a more science fiction setting with the rules that Fading Suns has took a little bit to get used to, but they've really enjoyed it, and everybody's really looking back. The crew of the Oh Boy, which is kind of our studio Fading Suns game, they're all just waiting for the time when we can go back and continue that arc. I've really enjoyed, I mean, I'm a big fan of science fiction and of, obviously Dune, which I feel is a huge sort of foundational influence for Fading Suns. And I really enjoyed the way that the mechanics work. I enjoyed the little rules homilies that sort of explain why the mechanics were made the way they were. And it sort of reinforces the fact that this is a science fiction game, but that faith is really important, a really important part of it for the characters in the world. They all interact with, the church, either as part of or related to or against the church. And so there's kind of this foundational aspect of faith, which I've tried to bring into the games that we've played. They're uncovering lost saints and dealing with corruption inside the Orthodox Church, and yeah.
Nice. So
that's great.
You have definitely probably run more Fading Suns probably than anybody at this point of the new system.
Maybe.
So tell us maybe a GM who was a backer of the crowdfunding and is going to start running it. What are some of the maybe things that you didn't really think about at the beginning but have become important aspects of running the game?
So the main thing that really kind of comes to mind, and if you've watched the last 2 episodes, I've started to try and bring them in more, is the idea of states. There are physical and mental and spiritual states that players can both impose upon their enemies and have imposed upon them. And at first run through, when we started playing, obviously coming from other games, I was very quick to get the skill system down, the core mechanics down, and sort of combat down. And that has provided just a wonderful gaming experience. The players really enjoy the way the victory point system works and the weird point system, and how you can bank and use and kind of manipulate your tokens to kind of get the results that you're hoping for. But now that we've spent, I think we've been playing it for almost 18 months straight now, like on a weekly basis. Sometimes more like twice a week. It's really the states that have started to come out as a mechanic that I really want to start focusing on.
Cool.
If people are making influence rolls, what kind of state are they imposing or are being imposed on them? How do shake it off rules work? Things like poison or trauma. These states, to me, now that I've run a lot of it, it seems to be a core piece of the game that I really want to ensure is getting seen more on both sides of the table.
Nice. That's good advice. I'm always interested to know. You usually you read a rule set and you have an idea of it, but you really don't know it until you really start playing it. So that's good advice there. So kind of along that same lines, the sort of default when I've talked to Bill before, the sort of default character troop idea is like the idea of a noble, and then kind of their retinue that goes along and does whatever the noble's up to and whatever they get assigned. What have your troops kind of been like?
So the first troop, the crew of the Oh Boy, when we were originally making characters, we had someone who wanted to play someone from the Engineers Guild, and someone who wanted to play a spy, and someone who wanted to play a pirate. And then we sort of added Gemma in there as a member of the Battle Order. And it really came together more like a Firefly is kind of the example that has been given. They were on a station and it started to blow up, and their stories kind of converged. And so they're still sort of they're on the pilgrimage, right? Their troop is still kind of going through the play style of Fading Suns, but they came together more as and it's not even like a pirate crew. It really is more of this group of people who have become family and live on a ship because that's just the only option that they had. When we started the new arc for the Annals of Antioch, I wanted something a little bit more closer to that initial kind of default troop setting, but nobody really wanted to play the noble, so the noble ended up as an NPC and everyone else was part of their retinue.
Okay. Do you think that'll happen commonly? I mean, not everybody wants to play the noble, but almost everything in this setting sort of revolves around nobility at some point or another.
I think that, you know what, honestly, I don't know. I think that the callings and how you have so many callings per class, right? Class is really much more of the medieval version of class as opposed to, say, like the F20 version of class, where it's like you have, those who rule and those who pray and those who work and those who trade, merchants, nobles, priests, and yeomen. I think there are so many interesting ideas in the callings under each class that chances are you're going to have somebody who wants to play like a questing knight or something in the nobility.
Right.
But again, if you don't, it's just as easy to either give them a noble NPC who acts as their initial lead quest giver, or just say, all right, cool, well, here's the group that we have. Let's see where it goes from there.
Cool.
Nice. Along the same lines of, like, a GM, learning and realizing certain things are important. What's something that your players sort of didn't really realize that was maybe important in the game, and then now we're kind of picking up?
Mechanically, initially it was the victory point, like sort of the bank, like especially when we got the updated rules, and it's like, all right, you can't just save all of your victory points from one round to the next. You can keep a certain amount at the start of your turn, so find ways to spend it. And also there's always that little bit of a learning curve when you go from, again, a D20 game where the higher you roll, the better the outcome is, right, and Fading Suns where you're trying to actually roll under a specific number, and that the natural 20 is really the worst thing that you can roll in Fading Suns. Kind of as the game has progressed, especially most people shied away from Theurgy and psionics at the start, because as you're learning a new game system, adding psionics or adding mystical powers on top of learning a character was just something nobody wanted to deal with. But as they've made more iterations of these characters, as they've made more character advancement choices, we're starting to see a lot of those like Theurgic powers come in on like new characters, or psionics with new characters. It's been enjoyable to see them interacting with more of the player-facing mechanics.
So, JM, when do we see your shows? When do you play Fading Suns?
So we play Fading Suns every Thursday night. That starts at 5:30 Pacific time, and we tend to go for about 2 hours, so 5:30 to 7:30. And that same time again on Tuesdays when we run the Torg game, and our Torg game is currently in we're calling it the Four Horsemen campaign. A group of Storm Knights has encountered a reality-rated foe who is a former Storm Knight and is kind of assembled the opposite of them. Lapis is drawing evil reality-rated characters for some diabolical plan, and so she, they're not just going against people from Core Earth or people from the Nile Empire, but Lapis has people from Tharcold who are aiding her, and hackers from the Cyber Papacy. And it looks like someone in the Torg game is starting to learn, hey, it's not just the Delphi Council who can operate like this.
For those of you at home, we have leapt forward in game genres, and we're talking about Torg Eternity now, rather than Fading Suns. But the Torg game you're doing, which is Curse of the Abandoned at this point, that's going on Thursdays, right?
The Fading Suns game, Curse
Fading
of the Abandoned,
Suns,
is on Thursdays, yes.
And
great.
What's the gist of that game, the Curse of the Abandoned?
So Curse of the Abandoned is them. So the cult of the Abandoned, they discovered on Antioch, and they were the ones who activated this lost road that took them all to this planet of Antioch. And so when they returned to the known worlds, they decided they wanted to try and track down the Abandoned and see if they could sort of find and stop this antinomous. So in Fading Suns, the antinomists are against the name of the Pan Creator, and so they're sort of our evil, demonic worshipping cultists who worship these creatures that live in the darkness between stars that are sort of eating the light of the universe. So they're on this pirate port of New Phoenicia, and they have I'd love to say infiltrated. That was originally how the plan went, but they really just shot their way into this pirate stronghold and are now approaching kind of the core of this cultist group that has infiltrated these pirates. And so we're approaching sort of the end of this arc and seeing what's going to happen there.
Nice. And are you running like official content or like official adventures, or are you just kind of making your own stuff up?
I'm making my own stuff up as I go.
Nice. Cool. So Bill Bridges and Andrew Greenberg are continuing their Heretical Musings show. So that is the next episode is next week, and it's every 2 weeks, Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Pacific. So make sure to catch that to kind of hear the Pan Creator himself, Bill Bridges and Andrew Greenberg, talk about all things Fading Suns. Let's go ahead and move on with the Dark Eye. So we recently announced that the Gods of Aventuria crowdfunding is going to be July 21st through August 11th. So you can check that out. We released the first kind of preview where Tayo talked about what's going to be in the crowdfunding, which includes the Gods of Aventuria books and also the finale of the Theater Knights adventures. That'll be campaign books 4 through 6. So if you're interested in all of that stuff, definitely check that out. So that will be July 21st through August 11th.
Now, we do have the Book of Heroes computer RPG, and that is out now. That is the first computer experience available ever, I think, for the Dark Eye, and you can find that on Steam right now. It's getting good reviews. It's out. People are having a lot of fun with it. We'll put the link up after the show.
Yeah, so that one, it's got. I've looked at it. I'm still excited and ready to play it. I haven't played it myself yet. I know some of the folks I saw, Katarina talking about, they were going to play it on the German side. So you can check those out, I'm sure, on the Ulisses Spiel streams, but those are all in German. So. And then I recently finished read through of the Theater Knights. In preparation for the Gods of Aventuria Kickstarter, I wanted to really wanted to get into it and understand what this campaign was that has kind of been going on for a little while. And so I read through the first one, and so you can come and you can check that out on our YouTube channel. I think it's like five episodes or so, where I kind of just read all the little details. I kind of talk about it. A lot of the fans in the comments kind of tell me some of the little details. One of the cool things about Dark Eye is that there's so many kind of little lore details everywhere, and things kind of like you're like, I don't understand what this is, and then you either need to go look it up or someone tells you, and you're like, oh, that's awesome. Like, I just love those little details. And see, Trikoff Ravenwood says Book of Heroes is not the first Dark Eye game ever, but it's the first for 5th edition. Yeah, for sure. All right. So let's get into Aventuria, Tim.
My background noise has become rather high. Let me know if it gets
gotcha.
too bad. That's all right. But for Aventuria, the next products for the English-speaking market have been approved. They're in initial talks right now for when we're going to run the actual crowdfundings for those. So the materials are in hand. It's all a matter of production and deciding when we're going to schedule that. In the meantime, we do have some terrific streams for the Aventuria adventure card game. And on Saturdays, we've been uploading videos of Eric Simon playing his solo adventures. Those are usually at 11 a.m. Pacific time. How many of those are up now?
I think we're about a dozen, somewhere around a dozen.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a bunch of.
Yeah, there's quite a bit, and it's a great way to learn the game. In fact, we've got. We're looking at doing some online and computer play variations of Aventuria, at least in the exploratory stages. And I know working with some of those people trying to learn the game, looking at Eric's videos has been very helpful. So if you're looking to learn a new game, look for a fun one, this is a great way to do it. Check those out.
Yeah, he's going through a bunch of the official content. So Definitely check that out. If you're interested in seeing how the individual add-ons work, you can see them in action. So for Torg Eternity, the physical copies, if you were a backer for the crowdfunding, should be shipping real soon, definitely this month. And once backers have their content shipped, we'll open up purchasing for the general public of both the physical and the PDF products. The in preparation for the next crowdfunding, which is Tharkold, that will be June 23rd through July 14th. We will be we're doing previews. Deanna has been putting up previews. The first preview was kind of Tharkold Year 1. The second one was Aspirants in the Race. And then the most recent one was Cranod and Jezreel. So talking about the former and the new High Lord for Tharkold. So definitely check those out on the website. We're also continuing with the Stay at Home and Play Torg Eternity. So you can, we've put up the quick start, so you can run the game for your friends if you haven't played it yet. We've also included the drama deck as pay what you want, so you can go grab that as a PDF, as well as the day one adventures, the GM screen, and the archetypes. So you can get everything you need to play Torg Eternity. You can find that at ulysses-us.com as well. So let's get into streams. So JM, tell us about your stream, The Four Horsemen.
So the Four Horsemen is we've actually got Ross, who is one of the designers from Torg Eternity, who's playing with us, which is a lot of fun. The group is on the trail of a mystery woman from the Nile Empire, who is sort of used to be a member of the Delphi Council and has gone rogue, and has gathered her own group of reality-rated Storm Knights to kind of oppose the Four Horsemen, and kind of they don't really know what she's after at this point. There's a lot of different things. She seems to be sort of one step ahead of them at this point, with her sort of intimate knowledge on how the Delphi Council approaches things. So on Tuesday, they had it was supposed to be a big fight in a gambling den run by a smuggler out of the Nile Empire, but instead, through cards and exploding dice, they just mopped the floor with Lord Grimdark, and they are on the river heading towards a small airport outside of Philadelphia, trying to get to the Delphi Council's aircraft carrier, their headquarters, where they believe Lapis, their nemesis, is heading.
Nice. And so kind of similar to what I asked you with Fading Suns, how usually the Delphi Council, I mean, you've mentioned that, but that's sort of the point in Torg of bringing characters together is the Delphi Council. Has that also been what you guys have been running off?
Yes, both this game and the one that we were running in the studio that we hope to get back to, the Eternity Shards game, they are both, all of those characters are deeply tied into and connected with the Delphi Council. The Delphi Council is sort of helping them, give them resources and give them kind of insight into what's going on so that they can kind of further their missions.
And when you run Torg Eternity, I've noticed a lot of the adventures and things are kind of like cosm hopping. Do you feel like you do that a lot, or do you like focus on one for a while?
So in the Four Horsemen, we've stayed in Core Earth for right now, although they did manage to foil a plot to draw Philadelphia into the Living Land. With the studio game, which again you can go and check out on the Ulysses International YouTube, the Eternity Shards game, the goal there is to sort of both for my players and the audience really say, hey, we're going to run like 6 to 8 sessions in a cosm and show you what is there, and then we're going to move on to the next one. So I built a campaign framework on why the group is sort of moving from cosm to cosm to on the track of these ancient artifacts that were buried thousands of years ago, which feels very pulpy and sort of high adventure.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So what the genres of Torg are kind of all over the place. What
There.
what are some of the your inspiration that you've used? Movies or TV shows or books or whatever.
Well, in for the Eternity Shards game, we started in the Nile Empire, so I leaned pretty heavily into sort of the pulp radio dramas that I really enjoyed. Obviously Indiana Jones and sort of these artifact huntings. When we went to Isle, I drew a lot of Celtic and Welsh mythology and Arthurian legend kind of into what was going on there. I mean, it helps. I was listening to the Once and Future King with my son.
Nice.
So that was kind of at the forefront of my head. In Tharcold, we're dealing a little bit more, I would say in Tharcold, and then also sort of in the Four Horsemen game, where I'm leaning a little bit more into sort of like Smiley's War, the LA or the Le Carre novels, and the fact that there's definitely something going on, and the players don't know who they can trust. Their contact in the Delphi Council, who sort of gathered them because this undersecretary at the Delphi Council had been assassinated, turned out to have been a plant by Lapis for weeks before they encountered them. And so when this was revealed, they're now in the wind, and they don't know who they can trust. They just know that they keep having to push through, kind of going forward from there. Also, I mean, I've always heard that Core Earth is sort of the Earth where Die Hard is a documentary as opposed to a fictional movie. So I always try and end the game with a good solid twist or a good explosion, so that we can jump right back into the session at the next moment. So again, kind of leaning into the old radio drama where you kind of have to end the episode on a high note so that people will come back next week to find out what happened.
Nice. So kind of going back on the questions, like what was something that you've realized after playing Torg Eternity for so long now, that are kind of coming up and that's more important than you initially thought?
So what's interesting to me is, you have the drama cards and you have the destiny cards, and I'm used to things like possibility points, right? Right. Most games these days have some way for players to mitigate a bad roll, or say this is really important to me. I really want to succeed. I was not prepared for how much the destiny cards would actually affect gameplay. The kind of largest example to me was at the end of the Isle arc in the Eternity Shards game. The group had descended into this castle, into Kardok Castle, and the red dragon was rising up, and they weren't able to actually stop it from rising, so they were going to have to fight it and figure a way to put it back to sleep so that Isle and England didn't tear itself apart. And one of my players played the martyr card and was just like, yeah, no, I'm willing to sacrifice my character's life for this. So I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to drive the dragon back into the hole and kind of follow in after. And that's how this is going to go. And so I would say, as you start playing Torg, one, as a player, use the destiny cards. You get them back. They are not a afterthought. They are sort of one of the core mechanics of the game. And as the GM, I've had to I normally hold plots very loosely in my hands because players do their own thing, and you never really know how they're going to react to something you have planned. I tend to run more of a consequence-based game, so I start an initial scene and then just sort of react to what the players do. But with Torg, I find that even that loose holding can be thrown wildly out the window with a Cosm card or a Destiny card, or the group is trying to do something and the drama deck works against them and they can't act. They may be making their rolls, but the drama deck says, no, this you fail. You can't complete the task in the allotted time because of how the cards have come up. It's not a bug, it's a feature. It forces the group to kind of engage with the push and pull of drama and destiny in a way that usually is handled with more hand waving and narrative effects in other games.
So is that would that be kind of your advice for players then to kind of like make sure they realize how those mechanics work for the cards?
Yes. So the things that have kind of come up after running a bunch of Torg is one, lean into those mechanics. They're there for you. Obviously it's frustrating if the drama deck doesn't allow you to get all the way through a dramatic task, or you thought that you had one more card, but it came up wrong. Just lean into that. That's sort of part of the way Torg goes. Don't overlook multi-actions and multi-attacks and interaction attacks. Torg is designed to let you do all of the fun things in your head. If you want to, at a large monster that you're fighting, by running around with a rope and tripping them, that's a maneuver. If you want to trick a person, you actually have a skill, and you can impose penalties or give bonuses through interaction attacks. And then also on the drama deck, my players are starting to really engage with this. There's an approved action on the bottom of the drama deck card. So when you're in combat, you use the drama deck, and they're not attacks. I mean, sometimes they're the attack action, but sometimes they're intimidate, sometimes they're maneuver. And if you do the approved action or take it as part of a multi-action, you get more destiny cards. And so sometimes you may really want to shoot the bad guy, but it may be cooler to do a maneuver because that's the appropriate, that's the approved action. So it kind of forces the players to think beyond, I hit him with my sword this round, into what else could I be doing in addition to hitting them with my sword this round.
Nice. Cool. So the Four Horsemen is every Tuesday at 5:30 Pacific on Twitch, followed by the upload to YouTube. So definitely check that out. It features obviously JM and Ross Watson, Torg Eternity designer, as one of the players. Let's see. Someone says, Padre says in the chat, interaction attacks are a key part of the game. That -4 from a very vulnerable can really help take down a large monster.
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's move on to Myth: Dawn of Heroes. So Eric has been doing these hero design spotlight articles and videos. So each week we've been putting those up. We've done the Acolyte, the Hunter, the Brigand, and I've got the Hunter on there twice. So basically they're short articles where he talks about the changes that have been that have been put in place for the new Dawn of Heroes game that's coming up the end of this year sometime. We'll be doing the crowdfunding for it. And this week's Dawn of Heroes spotlight is The Apprentice. So we're going to roll into this video and see what changes and enhancements are in store for The Apprentice. So here we go.
The Apprentice is the classic glass cannon hero. Most of what he does is unload damage, but he's also very fragile and liable to draw attention. It wasn't hard to keep that feeling, so instead, we leaned into it with the Dawn of Heroes version. At the same time, we did find a couple of things to improve with how the Apprentice plays. One of the key things we wanted for the Apprentice was a sense that the various element keywords, ice, fire, earth, air, are always important. This is one of the ways that we can make the hero feel more like his intended flavor. The Apprentice is already strong, but an apprentice who manages the elements well is even stronger. Let's take a look at Arcane Lance as an example. The previous version was strong, but we've increased its potential power by tying an effect to the other cards you've already played this turn. It costs more now because of that, but it is almost certainly worth it if you can get even one extra target. You may also notice that it's a free action now. Remember when I said we were leaning into the glass cannon? Now almost all of the Apprentice's cards are free actions, unless they're interrupts. If you need to do a ton of damage all at once, you can. But don't forget that you only have 5 vitality, and the Apprentice is not good at running away when you jump to the top of the threat meter. Another new keyword on the Arcane Lance card is Drain. Let's take a look at those mechanics. So Drain now says, when you play a card with the Drain keyword, you must first discard one card of your choice from one of your action spaces. You then play the card with the Drain keyword into the freed up action space. This Drain mechanic is designed to do a couple of things. First of all, it helps with the action slowdown that can happen with keeping ongoing cards in play. Now that those cards are one of the few consistent ways for the apprentice to gain EP, it becomes even more critical to cycle them in and out of the action spaces. Secondly, if you want to hold on to those ongoing cards for a bit longer, the drain mechanic lets you play more of your hand even when some of your action spaces are occupied. On top of hand and action management, drain cards work interestingly with the elements, because you'll have to weigh whether you want to keep a less optimal card in your action space just because it has the right elements for the drain attack you're playing right now. In that way, Drain both makes the apprentice more accessible for new players, but also more versatile for experienced players. I'm Eric Simon, lead developer of Myth: Dawn of Heroes.
All right, so we just heard Eric talking about The Apprentice. That video clip will be up by itself in about 25 minutes if you want to watch that again on YouTube. And also it will go on our website along with the article. So if you want to read it, you can do that and look at the images again. So let's move from Myth Dawn Heroes into Myth Tales of Legend.
Sure, Myth Tales of Legend. I'll go ahead just to let everybody know that we've got Tales of Legend will be the role-playing game that we're going to use and set in the Myth universe. And Ross Watson is the primary designer on that. But our guest today, John Matthew, is a primary writer on that as well. And he's been doing the campfire chat every Thursday. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Ross and I are just doing the campfire chats, and we are talking about Myth Tales of Legend. We tried to do a alternate it off, so we do mechanics one week, and the next week we do more of the setting focused material. Ross is the lead designer on that. I'm the lead writer, so I'm doing a lot of setting development and kind of taking what we have in the world guide or the world book for Myth and sort of expanding it out in the ways that you would need to have access to for a role-playing game.
Nice.
That's great. Can you tell us, because this week is the Riverlands, is that right?
Yes, and then I think it's Riverlands Part 1. We broke the Riverlands up into sort of two parts because it's one of those core areas for where we're going to be starting out in Myth.
So
awesome.
Give us a little bit of a little teaser for the Riverlands.
The area of Myth that we kind of are focusing Tales of Legend in, and that the Dawn of Heroes game takes place in, is known as the Four Kingdoms. And so the Riverlands is one of these four kingdoms, and it's sort of the one in the middle. So it has kingdoms to the north and the west and the south of it. So it's fairly insulated from some of the larger threats that the darkness brings to bear. The armies aren't threatening it. The darkness threats there are a little bit more insidious. And so it's sort of this wealthy, this affluent kingdom, but it has a lot of the darkness is working in the hearts of the people there. And then kind of the big threat and opportunity that is happening in the Riverlands is that the Riverlands have the Dimwold, where the Dusk Court of the Elves are,
right.
And actually where the Lucanine, the werewolves, have recently returned to the world of Myth. So there is now this threat in the forest that could be, they could be aligned with darkness. You may be able to, as heroes, right, try to understand this new species that has come back out of legend into sort of the current times of Myth. And so it is probably also the most traditional, fantasy setting of the Four Kingdoms, right? To the south, you have more of like the desert and sort of a more Arabian influence. To the west is a little bit more industrial and maybe steampunk, and to the north is more tribes and constant warfare. So the Riverlands, if you want a good touchstone for saying, hey, we're going to start a game of Myth, Tales of Legend, and we're coming to it from a more traditional fantasy background. Start in the Riverlands. Your players will have all of the touchstones they need to go forward.
Cool.
Nice. So Ross and JM are going to be talking about that today, and that is going to be at 11 a.m. Pacific, and that will be premiering on the YouTube channel. So to go check that out. And also, the last week's was on combat. There's been a couple of them on the different rules variations, and there was one about the now I can't think of the name. Harani, right?
Yes, yeah. The rat people, which Myth has some really cool new takes on either familiar tropes for different species, and we've got a couple of new ones. You can play as a Harani, a rat person, or a Spriggan, which is sort of think of a very small, like tree ant. Like you're more of a human-sized tree that was awakened long in the past and are now kind of moving out into the world.
Not so much a tree as a twig.
That's right.
Nice. And have you been playing any Tales of Legends playtests?
I did a playtest. I did a playtest for my group. I wrote the Lost Barrow, which is the adventure that's going to go into the quick start, and we want to do a playtest. So I got to sit down with one of my normal groups and say, okay, instead of playing what we normally play tonight, I want to kind of walk through the Lost Barrow and let's see kind of how the rules work, how the playtest went, and it went really well. My players really enjoyed it.
Nice. Based off of that, and then previous iterations of the system, what's even though you don't have as much maybe experience running this as Torg and Fading Suns, what's something that's that you've kind of picked up that you really like about the rule system?
So what I really like is the idea of the campfire. So what the idea in Myth is that stories have power, and stories are sort of the way that we pass down morals and knowledge and sort of traditions, right? It's almost like a meta idea in Myth, because the idea is, as players of the game, we are sitting around a table telling stories about our characters, but also the characters are sort of looking back on their lives and telling the stories of how they first got together and first stepped onto this road of being heroes. So there's a little bit of the way the campfire works is when you spend tokens, you can narrate. Wait, that's not the way it actually happened. If you roll a bad roll, you can spend tokens to get rerolls. And the idea is that there is this, you are actually not necessarily playing through in real time like you would in a normal role-playing game, but you're sort of remembering, hey, you remember that time that we went and dealt with that threat at the Lost Barrow? Oh yeah, I totally remember that. And so it's a unique way to sort of look at role-playing games. And I think for me, I come from a background of playing a lot of role-playing games and a philosophy, and so there's this idea that role-playing games in some ways is kind of the GM is sort of the modern version of the ancient bard or shaman, who is kind of telling these stories to kind of keep people engaged and like tied to culture. And so the GM is kind of really investing in that role, but drawing the players in as well, right, into that sort of, hey, let's get together. Because role-playing games is one of those few things that we still do in a modern age, or we did until everything has happened, where we gather as friends around a table, right? Whether that's a virtual table or a physical table. We gather together and we tell stories, and I think it's really important. So that's probably my favorite thing about Tales of Legend, is that that's sort of the focus of the game, and everything else hangs on that.
So you're the lead writer of Tales of Legend. What does that look like? Like how much lore was there from the Myth board game, and what are you doing with that? So there
were. When we started this off, I went through the LE rulebook, which was sort of the previous iteration to the current World of Myth rulebook, and I went through all of the adventures, and I just created and the cards, because there's so much like lore buried in the cards. But for a board game, you don't necessarily need much more than painting a setting in very broad strokes, because really Myth the core of the story came, in the little scenarios that you were playing out. So we had this 4 kingdoms that was painted in very broad strokes. We have broad ages that kind of had themes that they went into, and like here's some high points, but not a lot of like detailed information. So my job as the writer is really to take what the board game has laid down and then drill down from there. So to provide more depth, more hooks for a GM who is coming to the table. So instead of saying, hey, we're going to play through this scenario tonight, and here's kind of the lore that's self-contained in here, they can say, well, I want to run something in the Riverlands, and here's all of these different hooks to kind of inspire me to run a game going forward from there. It also involves, writing adventures. So, I did the Lost Barrow. We're going to be doing a couple more kind of going forward, and I'm involved in coming up with the stories and then writing up the adventures for Tales of Legend.
Nice.
Cool.
So how much kind of crossover is there going to be from using the miniatures from the board game? Like is that a plan or an idea for the RPG, or is it more like a narrative style RPG, or what's the plan?
I think our plan is that if you have the Myth board game, you're going to be a leg up, because you're going to have the board game tiles. The way we've developed movement, you're going to be able to use the board game tiles. You can use the board game minis. We've already talked about doing some new miniatures for Tales of Legend, for new creatures or versions of creatures that we're putting forward. So I think that they're going to be pretty, and the dice. What are they? The fate dice. Mm-hmm. In the board game with all the different symbols. We have ways that you can use those in the role-playing game as well. Right. And if you don't have them, don't worry, you just need D6s. So there's going to be a way to just roll a standard D6. But if you're invested into the Myth world, you're going to be able to use things from one in the other.
Nice. That's awesome. And is there going to be crossover between the RPG and the board game, as far as like story and adventure, like adventures? Like is one adventure going to have anything to do with an adventure and the other?
So we have an idea for a trio of adventure, like a book that has sort of a trio of adventures. And the idea was we're going to take 1 or 2 of the adventures from the Myth board game that we really liked and kind of take that scenario and expand it out and do it for the RPG. So we're definitely looking at all of the material that's already out for Myth and kind of saying, what can we use? What stories do we want to retell, and what new stories do we want to kind of engage with going forward?
So going back to Torg and Fading Suns and having like the core reason of characters to adventure in those games, what is the kind of core reason that characters adventure in Myth Tales of Legend?
So what's interesting to me is Ross really leaned into, if you've played the board game, you know that you start off your first adventure not even as a hero. You're kind of an adventurer who sort of leapt into things maybe not as prepared as you should. So the soldier doesn't have a sword and a shield. He's got a pot lid and a fire poker. And we've kind of, Ross, that was kind of the core starting point for the role-playing game as well. So you're the peasant hero who takes his father's sword and kind of heads out. She has a leg up on a Myth character, and we're not saying that you're not as you're going to be completely effective. Like you're going to feel like you have a character that is effective in the game from minute 1 of playing Myth. But getting new gear is definitely going to be one of those driving factors. But with the idea that in this age of heroes, the light has not created any sort of avatar. There's no avatar of light. There's no one single point of light that stands against the darkness. There are now multitudes of lights, and your heroes are one of those. And so the idea is you're a group of people who was looking at some scenario. Something was going on in your community, in your kingdom, in your land, and you were the guys who said, no, enough is enough. We're going to make a change. And so one of the things that we've tried to do with all of our hooks and all of our setting development is not just say, is this cool, but what happens if the heroes don't get involved? So really, the setting of myth that we're developing and the way that the groups kind of work is, if you stay home and do nothing, the darkness wins. So you're the people who kind of stand up and say, no, the light is worth fighting for. Communities are worth fighting for. My friends are worth fighting for. And I may not know what I'm doing yet, but I can't sit back at home and do nothing anymore.
So one of the cool things I think that people really like about the Myth board game is the art. Keith's art is amazing. How has the art kind of influenced how you see the game?
Well, one is the map. The map had so many cool places that weren't actually necessarily explored. So we were like, all right, well, like let's come up with story for Moonglow Spire and all of these different places. So the map was a driving force into kind of the setting development. But the art is great. I think the thing that kind of comes to mind the most is the Apprentice. The Apprentice has sort of this red skin. And they're the only people with this like this deep red skin. And we sort of talked with, I think it was Brian, about what was going on, and we got some feedback. And so it influenced basically one of the mechanics for the Apprentice is known as the charring. You can focus the elemental energies you're calling on through your body, but it starts to turn your skin that red color. It's sort of a process that happens. And so it even influenced something in one of the Four Kingdoms, where one of their main exports is a spice that apprentices can take, and it hides the charring so that people don't automatically know, hey, that's a spellcaster. But once you start taking it, you very quickly become addicted to it. And if you stop taking it, you die. So it was just this interesting image from the game that we sort of teased out, well, what would be the reason that all apprentices sort of have this like deep red skin? And that's kind of that's one way that the art influenced both the mechanic and the setting design of the role-playing game.
Mm-hmm. How about there are heroes in the myth board game, and that's kind of what you play as you play the game. But with an RPG, you want things to kind of be a little bit more open rather than just having like 4 choices or whatever. So how did you guys use the base heroes and kind of make something more usable for an RPG?
So we looked at the base heroes, and I think we have 12 archetypes. So we took all of the basic archetypes out of the core board game, save for those ones that really rely. There's a couple of ambiguous heroes where they're using the darkness's power against them, and so for the core game, we're like, let's just focus on those archetypes that are very clearly heroic to kind of start out from there. And there's a lot of we made a ton of spreadsheets, which may not sound like fun to anyone else, but I enjoy
That's
making
game design for you.
Yeah.
So I went through all of the cards for each of the archetypes and said, all right, here's what the card is. Here's kind of the core of what it does. How can we translate that back into an ability or a talent or a spell? And that's more on Ross's side of things. But we really were trying to capture if not the exact mechanics of the characters, the heroes in the board game, we were trying to at least capture sort of the feel of what they bring to the board game and make it more useful in a role. Maybe not more useful, that's not a great term, but a little bit broader for use in a role-playing game. And then we did the same thing with the monsters. We were able to look at sort of their spawning rules, kind of the lore that is given in the LE book, and kind of how they play out in the game, and sort of develop some threat abilities and some really neat mechanics around the monsters of Myth.
Nice. So what are kind of the core races for Myth?
So we have humans and elves and dwarves, and those are kind of your your core fantasy touchstones. And then we have the Hurani, which again is this, they're one of the elder races whose empire has sort of fallen. They live in kind of the dark and forgotten places of the Four Kingdoms, you know, the back alleys, the caves under cities, that sort of thing. You have the Spriggans, who the elves woke long ago to help them defend the forest. And so they're the tree people. And then this was one of the things that there were images of these mongoose people, but we didn't really have anything for them. There was no characters, there was no lore, there was no monsters. And so we introduced the Tavians as a playable race. They're these anthropomorphic mongoose people who are from an island that is removed from the Four Kingdoms. And we did a whole episode on them. And essentially, they're where the pupils and the monks come from. So you have, in archetypes, you have some very traditional fantasy archetypes, and then you have a sword saint and a monk. And so what we have is this blessed isle that the Tavians come from, and they sent their master and several of her apprentices to sort of pave the way to kind of like let people know, hey, something is coming, and the blessed isle, we want to work with you. And so they spread their philosophies and their fighting styles and their teaching to help the Four Kingdoms kind of combat the darkness, not knowing that they were sent to the Four Kingdoms because they would have been the ones who were so altruistic. They would have opposed the rise of this tyrant. And now the Blessed Isle is now under the control of the tyrant, and he is preparing to invade the Four Kingdoms. And very few people even know that this is going on. And so hopefully storyline wise, we're going to get to do sort of this invasion storyline at some point down the road. And really kind of delve into the Tavian culture and the Blessed Isle, and who's with the tyrant, who's against the tyrant, kind of what's going on there.
Nice. And where did the name the Tavians come from? Was that part of the game, or is that a call out to like Ricky Tikki Tavi?
It is definitely a call out to Ricky Tikki Tavi. When Ross and I had our initial design meeting, we were trying to come up with a name for them. And we very clearly were like, all right, they're mongoose people, so obviously their ancient enemy is the Naga. And we were kind of going back and forth. And one of us brought up the idea of leaning into the Ricky Tikki Tavi story. And I think Ross was the one who came up with the name Tavian. And as soon as it was said out loud, we were both like, that's it. That's where we're going. The Tavian culture, that's what we want.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, I think that's a great point to end this on. So JM, where can people find you online?
I'm on Twitter. I'm Defoggi JM. I think it's the same for me on Instagram. If you want to follow Iconic, that's my company, and we do streams on iconicproduction.com, or sorry, Iconic Production on Twitch. You can find us at iconicproduction.us. You can search the Iconic Podcast. That's definitely where we started. We do a 13th Age podcast. Iconic Production is also on YouTube and Twitter and Instagram as well. So.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you for watching Ulysses Worlds show. If you'd like to chat more with Ulysses folks or other fans, please check out our Discord community where we have channels for all of our games. So for Ulysses Spiel, I am Robert Aducci, and this is Tim Brown.
How's it going? I hope everybody had a good time today. Thanks, JM, for spending some time with us.
Thanks for having me on.
I think everybody had a good time getting to know you a little better.
Definitely. So if you like the show, please follow and subscribe to all our channels on Twitch and YouTube, and turn on those notifications so you don't miss out on anything. Thank you, fans and people in the chat who have chatted with us. So come back next Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific for more Ulysses Worlds show. Bye-bye.